Hi, guys. Welcome back to An ADD Woman podcast. I'm your host, Lacy Estelle, and today we're going to go back to the basics a little bit, and I'm going to talk to you guys about my favorite / most embarrassing 10 signs that when I realized I had ADHD, realized that a lot of these things, they weren't just my character quirks. They were probably flashing neon lights that I had ADHD and wasn't aware. Maybe you'll be able to relate to them, but if not, you should at least get a good laugh out of all of the silly things that I have done over the years. Welcome to An ADD Woman podcast. I'm your host, Lacy Estelle, writer of all things about ADHD parenting and being an ADHD mother on Mothering the Storm with Lacy Estelle at lacyestelle.com. Here on An ADD Woman podcast, we're going to switch it up and talk about all things to do with ADHD as an adult woman and how we deal with it. Now, you might be thinking, ADHD, women don't really have that. Actually, we do. We've all just been doing such a great job for years of masking it. So let's dive in. Years ago, when I first started writing, I wanted to be the next Rachel Hollis. And I think I talked about that in a previous episode. I talked about how I wanted to be that motivational speaker that was all about you can do it and that people looked up to me. And as much as I think I still dream of doing speeches and things along those lines, what I quickly realized was that my own voice was different. And so I started writing just about the different things that I was struggling with, the different things that we were dealing with in my family. And one of them that came to the surface was when my son was getting diagnosed with ADHD. So I started writing about his ADHD. And as that came out, I realized I think I have ADHD. So I started writing a little bit about that. And somehow that struck a chord. So I wrote an article some time ago that was like, Adult ADHD Top 10 Signs. And evidently it was a hit because it's had a lot of shares. And when I reread it, I wish it said Adult ADHD Top 10 Most Embarrassing Signs, because some of the things that I read back and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember I did that a lot. I still do that. They're just kind of, I don't know, they're kind of embarrassing. But you know, I talk on this podcast a lot about how it's really important for me to be vulnerable with you, to tell you all of the things that I've dealt with and gone through and overcome or am still working on overcoming. Ultimately, I mean, hopefully, if you listen to this list, you'll relate to it. And maybe if you're on the fence and thinking, I don't think I have ADHD, but then I go through this list and you're like, I've also done all of those things my whole life, you may want to investigate further. So just so you know, when I first started writing, my blog was actually going to be called Me and My Mess. And I jokingly said it because my life was a mess at the time. I was going through a divorce and I was living back at home. And I just was like, well, this is what it is. This is me and my messy life. And it didn't dawn on me as much as I was definitely in my 20s, and I've talked about ADHD in my 20s, and I think that your 20s, no matter if you are neurotypical or if you're not, are hard. There's a part of your 20s that no matter how prepared you are, they're just kind of difficult. But I didn't realize that for every 2 steps forward, I was taking 3 steps back sort of thing compared to my peers. Okay, so one of the first signs I think that I probably had ADHD is that I signed up over the course from the time that I was like 18 to the time that I was 29. Gosh, I actually still signed up for one more last year. I signed up for so many different multi-level marketing companies. I would hear the sales pitch for the business idea. I knew that I wanted to have a business. I wanted to run a business. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I was destined for that, right? And if you've had ADHD for any length of time or you've done any research into it, you do know that we do tend to be entrepreneurs, which is great because we're really great risk takers. But when you've done this sort of thing over and over again, it starts to kind of become embarrassing, especially because we struggle massively, especially if we don't know that we have ADHD. We struggle massively to follow through. So of course I would sign up for all of these companies. I would be so excited, ready to go crazy and sell essential oils or sell weight loss products or anything along those lines, positive that this was going to be the thing that made me a millionaire, right? And after about 3 months, I'd always fall off the bandwagon and just was kind of like, I don't have time to dedicate to it right now. Maybe I was a little impulsive. Well, I was probably a lot impulsive. I didn't realize I had ADHD. So if you have signed up over the years for several different MLMs and then kind of fallen off with all of them, and you question whether or not you're the type of person that can follow through with anything, maybe you have ADHD. Shiny object syndrome is definitely something that ADHD people have. Another one of those things that a lot of people do is they'll sign up for different career paths. I hear of so many people being like, oh, I think I'm going to get my real estate license. Yeah, I did that too. I thought for sure I was going to get my real estate license. And then after I got into it, I forced myself, knowing that I have ADHD, forced myself to really think about it and ask myself whether or not that was the career choice I wanted to make. And after I took the class and paid for it and all that stuff, I never took the exam because it was just, by that point, I knew myself enough to know that at least I had gone to the class. I had some understanding. Originally, I did it because I thought I wanted to invest in real estate, and I still have that plan. But I just knew I didn't want to spend time selling houses. It just wasn't something I wanted to do. And that's okay. So that's the other thing I'll say to this is that I'm not going through this list to shame you, because I have taken everything from this list. And once I compiled it, I was like, okay, what can I learn from all of these different things that I've started and then stopped? So the other thing I have on this list, and this kind of goes along with what this is that your long-term goals, they seem to change every few months, maybe every 6 months, maybe every few weeks. I'd have 6 months time of thinking about a certain type of business idea, or for a while, I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to go back to college. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And then something would come along and I would be like, oh, well, maybe I want to do that instead. So to say that you change your mind often is probably an understatement. And you start to feel like people know this about you. So you start to do stuff like when you get a new business idea, you might think it's really great, but you don't want to tell anybody because you're worried that they're going to say something like, oh yeah, like you finished the last one you started. Or, oh yeah, because you did that one that you had the idea 4 years ago. My first original business idea, go back years and years. I was like 23. I wanted to open a toy store, and I had done all this research on it. I knew what I was doing. I had contacted toy companies. I had all of the cards laid out, and I still wasn't past my own mindset of worrying about failure. And when it came time to take action, I stalled because I got scared. It became something to where I was like, if I do this, I was putting up, $15,000 to $20,000 in collateral through a toy company. And that scared me. And I thought, what if I don't follow through? This was before I even knew I had ADHD. Had I known then, I would have been able to say, oh, this is just your impulsive brain telling you that even though you've done all this research and you've laid everything out, that you're going to fail automatically. And that's just not true. If you continue to try to progress towards your goals, you will eventually find success. It just may not be as quickly as you would like it to be or as quickly as your neurotypical peers. But that's okay. One of the other biggest signs that I had ADHD is everybody knew that Lacy is late. Late Lacy. Well, Lacy runs on her own time. If you want Lacy to be there on time, tell her an hour early. I just thought this was something that my family did because my mother does it too. If you want us to be on time somewhere, you really should tell us, 30 minutes ahead of the time you want us to leave. So, if the party starts at 5:00, you're going to tell us the party starts at 4. We're going to get there by 5. So it is an unfortunate thing. And I've actually had family members who still, even though I have been this way my entire life, I've always struggled with time blindness, they still take it personal. And it's really frustrating because it's not personal. If how much being late bothers me could make me be on time, I would have been on time my whole entire life because it bothers me. I don't like being late, even though I sometimes just cannot help it. There are things that I will try to plan into my time that I didn't realize was going to take me as long as it did. That was another one of my big signs that might have some ADHD going on. Another sign is that cleaning your house to you might mean that you only get through organizing like your bookshelf in your living room, but you don't get to cleaning your entire living room. And why does this happen? Because ADHD people, I've talked about it, and I feel like the last 3 or 4 episodes, we don't understand sequencing. So like if we see that our entire living room is a mess, right? But we tell ourselves, well, the whole living room would be a lot cleaner all the time if the bookshelf was clean, because that's where we store a lot of the stuff that stays in the living room, right? So we start going through the entire bookshelf and we pull all the books off the shelf and we're trying to organize them, and we go super hyper focused and we decide that we're going to organize everything alphabetically. And you know what happens? Because we have time blindness, 2 hours pass, we're burnt out on organizing, and the living room is still a mess. And now the bookshelf is a mess. And you look around and you go, ugh, I created more work for myself. But if you are treating your ADHD or you are having some sort of accountability, you can learn that organizing big stuff, as much as it is very helpful, you have to have a system or a plan in place for how you're going to organize it. You can't just kind of do those types of things willy-nilly. And it's also a matter of cleaning has to be defined for you in, 5 or 6 simple steps that always will make a space clean. And by clean, I guess I mean tidy. I don't necessarily mean that you're going to mop your floors every single time you clean. All I'm saying is what I have done is I've told myself, okay, if I want my living room clean, everything has to be picked up off the floor and it has to be vacuumed and there has to be no food in the couch and my blankets have to be folded. That's clean. That's not organized. Organized and clean are 2 different things. But the other thing is like, so your child, you might tell your child, if you just figured out that your child has ADHD, you'll say, hey, I need you to go clean your room. They have no idea what that looks like. They know that from the way their room looks right now and the way they want it to look or the way you want it to look means that everything has to be tidy and in order. And in their mind, they have these images of what that looks like at the end, but getting it from point A to point B is very blurry. And so they end up spending all their time organizing like their dresser drawer or digging everything out of their closet, even though they don't know where it's all going to go, but they just know you said you wanted their closet clean. And then all of a sudden they're very overwhelmed because everything is out and everything is even worse of a mess. There was a show some time ago. It was a Asian woman. I think it was on Netflix. And everything was about feeling joy. So what you would do is when you organize the space, you would pile everything into a pile and then you pick things up one by one. And if it brought joy to you, you would keep it, right? And I'm sure you probably remember what I'm talking about. I can't remember the name of the show right now, but it was a big, it was a big trend for a while for people to clean their homes this way. And if you had ADHD, it was probably the worst idea you could ever have to try to clean that way. Because here's exactly what I can tell you. When you have ADHD, you pile everything into a ginormous pile, you are going to overwhelm yourself massively. And then what you will end up doing is you'll just walk away. You'll walk away from that pile. You'll want to ignore it. Now in the show, she had people that wanted to ignore it, but she forced them to go through the things because they had no choice. They had to get rid of things. But there was some accountability to that. After I watched that show a couple times, I was like, I'm going to try this. And I tried it with my kids' rooms. And I piled all of their toys into a ginormous pile on the floor. And immediately I was so overwhelmed that I probably threw away half of their toys, even though they might have been good toys. I just could not deal with the idea of this giant pile, and I just needed it gone. Now, that sounds like once I had that pile, I was motivated. I was not motivated. I did not want to do it. I did not want to touch it. I kept wanting to ignore it. I think it was still in there for 4 or 5 days before I finally went in there and took care of it. Do not try to clean your house by organizing things, by pulling them all together and putting them in a pile or doing anything along those lines. Best suggestion I would tell you, and this is what works for me now, is you do one room at a time. And my mom taught me this. I didn't believe her for a long time, but it's very true. One room at a time. Now, there's going to be stuff you take from, so say if I am cleaning my living room, obviously there's going to be stuff in the living room that I'm going to take from the living room and put away in my children's room, or I'm going to put in the kitchen. When you have ADHD, it's very hard when you do that to not want to shift and, oh, okay, well, now I'm in the kitchen, I should do the dishes. No, go back to the living room, get it completely done until it's finished. Once that's finished, then move on to the next room. This is really helpful because a lot of times I will tell myself that for my house to be clean, my kids' rooms need to be organized. Yes, that would help a lot, but a lot of times I really just need my kids' stuff out of all of the other rooms in the house. And I can just go put it in their rooms. Whether I have somewhere for it to go or not, I can just go put it in their rooms. And then it's out of the way. It's not in the main living areas. And later, when I finally have the energy and hopefully the motivation, I can go back to their bedrooms and help them get everything organized. But you will overwhelm yourself very easily if you try to clean by organizing. So another sign that I had ADHD was I would make plans and I would cancel or I would forget them so often that my friends kind of learned that I'm not that reliable. I had a friend at one point, I called her just to tell her that I was going to be 5 minutes late. Well, she was so used to me being 35 minutes late that by the time I did get to her and I had only been 5 minutes late, she totally canceled plans on me. And I was pretty upset and hurt. And I think it was around that time that I realized like people were always going to see me as just this flaky, unreliable person if they did not have a good understanding of ADHD, or at least they didn't understand my motives. I always like to say people with ADHD, we have like the best of intentions and we just miss the mark, because anytime that I leave my house, if I have a date, if I have an appointment somewhere, if I have somewhere I'm supposed to be, my intention is always to be on time, to be courteous to the other person. And a lot of times, more often than I care to admit, because I know I'm going to run late, I message that person because I'm still trying to be courteous. Hey, I'm so sorry. I'm running a couple minutes behind. I'll be there. I promise I'm coming. It's just one of those days. What they usually don't realize is that it's one of those days for me all the time. I have ADHD. I struggle with time blindness. I'm late often. It's not something I'm proud of. It is something I have worked tirelessly my entire life to fix. And it doesn't speak to my character very well because I know in my heart of hearts that my character is a reliable friend, that I am a reliable, trustworthy family member, that, I can be counted on. But as far as being on time, I don't feel time. I don't feel it. I don't recognize it when it's passing. It makes it very difficult for me to be on time going anywhere. The other thing that I'd never really realized was an ADHD thing is the constant want to interrupt. And I was told this one time. I was working at, it was my first receptionist job. And just so you know, before I started my podcast and my content creation and all this stuff, those were my main careers, as I was secretary and a receptionist for a counseling office. And then I was a law office secretary for a while. So it was like my bread and butter of what I did. Customer service, that kind of stuff. I did sales for a little while, but it wasn't my favorite. And it was my first receptionist job. I was like 19. The ladies that I worked with, they were older. And at some point, they finally pointed out to me, they're like, you realize you're kind of rude? And I was like, what? What do you mean? And they were like, you interrupt a lot. And I was like, I do? I didn't even notice that I did this. When I see it happening now, or I see family members of mine doing it, that I know they don't realize that they do it, I will point it out to them, because after this was brought to my attention, I was like, wow, I didn't realize how often I interrupted people. I think what it comes down to is, when you have ADHD, you have associative thinking all the time. And so I would be trying everything I could to be listening to what the person said, But say they said something about a red light when they were stuck at a red light the other day, and my mind might fixate on red. And then that might remind me of a red dress that I want to tell them about some sort of thing coming up this weekend. And the problem is because I'm so prone to forgetting what I'm about to say, is that I will immediately want to jump into talking about what just popped up in my head. And it comes off rude, and I don't mean for it to, obviously. And I try really hard now, like in podcast interviews, to purposely keep my lips shut just to keep myself from doing things. I also will err on the side of giving a lot of feedback when I am listening, and it helps to keep me from interrupting. I'll say things like, oh, yes, oh, okay, And in doing that, it stalls me from interrupting. But if you find yourself constantly interrupting conversations because your thoughts jump 2 or 3 thoughts ahead, it's not normal. And it's definitely worth talking to somebody about. The other thing, and this kind of all goes back to time blindness and procrastination, a little bit of the cleaning thing, is that you find yourself often having the greatest of intentions when it comes to getting things done and checked off your list. And for some reason, you still cannot bring yourself to do them. I have been trying really hard for the last 2 weeks to make myself write more, because I aside from this podcast, I also have a blog, and I cannot seem to get myself or get my thoughts gathered together enough to put anything down on either paper or type anything out. And this is not because I don't want to do it. It's because I really want to do it. But for whatever reason, my brain is just not sparking. It won't start up. It just won't. And I think I mentioned in a couple podcasts ago, I am between medications right now. And for that reason, I just can't, I can't seem to make myself do what I want to do. You'll feel like something is just insurmountable. My 13-year-old, anytime I ask him to do the dishes, like to him, it is just the hardest job on the planet. And we all know that it's not. It's not. And I've told him 100 times, it's not. You just have to keep doing it until it feels easier. But, his brain just does not release dopamine in the way that it's supposed to. So doing the dishes just is something, it's a task that he has to do just because he has to do it. And he cannot feel any sort of gratification or reward from doing it and just getting it done. It doesn't work. So the next one is definitely another big one for me. Once I started to realize I had ADHD, I had to look back on my whole life and really look at how it had played out. And one of the big diagnostic portions of, I say big, probably not super big, but it is important for you to have ADHD, even as an adult. They usually prefer for you to have presented symptoms before you were 12 years old. And for me, it was probably right around 10 to 11 years old that I started to present symptoms. Now, my parents were also going through a divorce. And so I think at that time, they kind of blamed themselves for my struggles in school. But the problem is that my struggles didn't just, they weren't just like a little blip on my radar. I went from getting like great grades and doing great in school to really starting to struggle with homework, not wanting to do my homework, not paying attention. I only wanted to focus on what I wanted to focus on. I didn't want to do work that I didn't like, that didn't sound fun, which doesn't work in any capacity once you're an adult, right? I mean, because if I just didn't want to do anything that is fun for me, I would never clean my house. So when I looked back, I realized that in high school, I was the poster child for ADHD. I struggled massively with self-esteem. I was smart. I was told by teachers that I was smart. I knew I was smart because there was classes that I enjoyed. And in those classes, I could easily get A's and B's. But in classes that I didn't really enjoy, I could not make anything higher than a D. My dad would say that. He'd say, well, I think that you enjoy French class and you don't like algebra, and that's why you're passing and failing. Well, yeah, sure. But how come all of my other friends who don't enjoy every single one of their classes can get those things done? So I just thought that I was just this flawed, lazy person. And I talked in other episodes, it made me very prone to toxic relationships because I got into relationships with people that, echoed all of the things I thought about myself. And I definitely thought that I was like this smart girl who was just really lazy or careless. And turns out I'm not lazy at all. My brain is not hardwired to help me stay motivated throughout the day. I have to take medication or I have to have other interventions to try to help me regulate the amount of dopamine. And if anybody who doesn't have ADHD knew how difficult it was for ADHD people to complete any task, I don't think they would ever call us lazy. Because the fact that we complete any task is some serious, serious hard work. And it's not hard work because the task is actually physically laboring. It's hard work because the mental capacity to get things done when you do not have the chemicals you need to get them done takes, I would say, probably 10 times the self-motivation than it would a neurotypical person who can just look at something and say, this has got to get done, so I'm going to do it. I wish I could go back. I wish I could go back to probably like my freshman year and say something to my mom and say, I think I have ADHD. Google was new. It wasn't like super new, but we were only starting to use it in school. Facebook was new. MySpace was still it. There wasn't a constant news feed of people talking about what's going on in their life to help people to understand and resonate with them. And I think had that been like that then, I would have found out a lot sooner. But God's timing is perfect. And I'm not unhappy about when I found out. It's helped me to mold me and shape me into this person that can talk to you guys and be super vulnerable about all the silly things that I've done in the past. So getting down to the last two signs, I would say, and this goes with what I was just talking about with school. You feel like maybe you're a lazy person. And a lot of times because of that, you start to think that maybe you're depressed. But then you have these moments where there are certain things that you can totally hyper-focus on. So then you will tell yourself that it's not a focus problem. But the problem is not focus. ADHD says attention deficit, and it's a really crummy name because it's more about attention regulation. We can't regulate our attention so that we can accomplish things unless that thing brings us this insane amount of dopamine. So you have to think of people like Michael Phelps. And I know he gets a bad rap because he was self-medicating with marijuana or whatever. But Michael Phelps is the perfect example of an ADHD person who can find a way to hyper-focus on something that he loves and his passion and help propel him forward and excel. And he actually can use that ADHD ability to hyperfocus to blow his opponents out of the water. No pun intended. So if you are the type of person that you can sit and read a book in 3 days time, if it interests you, but you can't seem to get yourself to sweep or mop your floors, even though you need to get it done, you might have ADHD. Why do I tell you all these things? Why do I tell you about the embarrassing moments that I had of, being a super late person, being considered not reliable, or how many different MLMs that I did? Oh my goodness, I can't even tell you. I have an old Facebook, okay? And I cringe if I go back to that old Facebook because there's so many pictures that I posted because I was posting about different companies and the opportunities and how I was going to do all these things. And it's nothing against MLMs. But when you start and stop and start and stop and start and stop, you're like, you're not cringing because there's anything wrong with selling those items. You're cringing because you're like, oh yeah, there's my ADHD blaring in my face. So the good thing is that through all of these things, I have found ways to deal with all of them. I've found ways to learn to interrupt people. I have found ways to stick with one business plan. I have, after trying on so many different hats when it came to business plans, I did eventually find something that was perfect for me, and that was content creation. I don't think that there's anything wrong with having gone through all these things. Had I not had all these signs, I wouldn't be able to relate as well to my audience, to you guys. And, you might be out there thinking, well, I have ADHD, but my background of my ADHD is like so much worse. I don't think there's any right or wrong journey here. Everybody arrives to this conclusion at some point or another because they're ready for change. And that's good. So whether or not you've had all the same symptoms as me, or whether or not you struggled with addiction first and then come to find out you had ADHD, or whether or not you have ADHD and also figured out that you have anxiety, like I do, or maybe you have depression. All of the things that you're dealing with in your own time, no matter how embarrassing they were all just stepping blocks to get you where you needed to go. And that's here. So if nothing else, don't be embarrassed by your past. Just learn from it and be willing to learn from it and be willing to tell other people how they can learn from your own past too. I applaud every single addiction story I hear of because I know I was probably only one trauma away from struggling with the same thing. And I know how hard it is to change your brain. So if you have listened to my story and you're thinking, or you've listened to my signs and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, my signs were way worse, or that's okay. It does not matter. You may also listen to all of my stuff and maybe saying, I don't think I struggle with any of those, but I still think I have ADHD. That's good too, because that tells me that maybe you're ready for a change before you've had to fumble so many times. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. That is going to wrap up this episode of an ADD Woman podcast. What did you think? How do you feel? I would love to hear from you. And if any of the things I just said are of interest to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear what you think. And I'll be talking to you guys soon.